I watched Matthew walk away, his sister Ella following closely behind like a loyal pet. Taking care of Mom is your job while we're gone, MIA. Don't mess it up, he called out over his shoulder without even looking back. The front door slammed shut, and I let out a long breath, my shoulders slumping. 4 weeks. 4 long weeks alone with Evelyn, Matthew's bedridden, silent mother. The same woman who had made it clear she didn't like me from the day I married her son 5 years ago. I slowly climbed the stairs to her room, dreading what was ahead. Evelyn lay still on the bed, her pale, wrinkled face as blank as ever. "Well, Evelyn, looks like it's just you and me," I mumbled, not expecting a reply. The first week passed slowly. I fed her, bathed her, and changed her bedding while she stared ahead without saying a word. The silence was heavy, broken only by the occasional creak of the old house. On the 8th day, something changed. As I leaned over to adjust her pillows, her bony hand shot out and gripped my wrist with unexpected strength. I gasped and looked into her piercing blue eyes, alive and sharp for the first time. "Enough of this act, MIA, she said in a raspy voice, rough from not speaking. "We have work to do." I froze, my mind spinning. Evelyn sat up, her movements steady and sure, swinging her legs over the edge of the bed. How are you?" I stammered. "I've been pretending," she interrupted, a small, wry smile on her lips. Acting like a helpless old woman to escape dealing with that miserable family, she started to explain, and as her words poured out, I could hardly believe what I was hearing. Matthew's betrayal ran deeper than I ever thought possible. Evelyn had been hiding a web of lies, cruelty, and manipulation that shook me to the core. A fierce determination began to build inside me. I always knew they weren't normal, but this is insane, I said, anger rising in my voice. "How could you let them treat you like that? You're their mother." Evelyn's face hardened. "I tried to fight them at first, but they stripped me of everything. My money, my power, my dignity. By the time I realized what they were doing, it was too late." Her icy gaze met mine. "That's why we have to stop them, MIA. Before they do the same to you." A chill ran through me. Was that Matthew's plan all along? To isolate me, to make me completely dependent on him and his family? The thought made my Esmathawak turn. "Start from the beginning," I said, my voice steady but shaking with anger. "I need to know everything." And so she told me. She revealed a dark story of greed and betrayal. It all started with her late husband's inheritance, which had torn the family apart. Matthew and Ella slowly turned on Evelyn, working together to take her money and control her life. Little by little, they stripped her of her assets, forcing her into a corner where she had no choice but to rely on them. As I listened, my blood boiled. The people I thought I knew were far worse than I could ever have imagined. But now, Evelyn and I had a chance to fight back, and I was ready. I watched Matthew walk away, his sister Ella following closely behind like an obedient puppy. "Taking care of Mom is your job while we're gone, MIA. Don't mess it up," he tossed over his shoulder without even looking at me. The front door slammed, and I let out a long breath, my shoulders sinking. 4 weeks alone with Evelyn, Matthew's bedridden, silent mother. The same woman who had shown me nothing but contempt since the day I married her son. The days blurred together until, one evening, Evelyn grabbed my wrist with shocking strength. Her sharp blue eyes locked onto mine for the first time. "Enough of this act, MIA, she said, her voice hoarse but steady. "We have work to do." I stared at her, stunned. "You've been pretending." She nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Yes. Playing helpless so I wouldn't have to deal with my miserable family. But it's time to fight back." As she spoke, the truth poured out like poison. Matthew and his family had been manipulating her for years, stripping her of money, power, and dignity, all while pretending to care for their poor, helpless mother. My shock turned to rage, tears burning my eyes. "Those bastards," I spat. Evelyn squeezed my hand, her voice calm but firm. "That's why we have to fight back. They won't see it coming." A plan began to form, the pieces clicking together like a dark puzzle. We would follow Matthew and his family to Maui and catch them in the act of whatever scheme they were plotting. Evelyn said she knew someone who could help, a former private investigator named Nicholas. "Can we trust him?" I asked as Evelyn dialed the phone. She shot me a reassuring look. "Nicholas is one of the good ones. He'll help us take those snakes down." The call was short, and by the time she hung up, a sly grin had crept across her face. "He's in," she said. said has been waiting for some excitement. A laugh escaped me, sharp and unexpected. Who would have thought I'd ever be part of a revenge plot? If Matthew could see me now. The thought sobered me, but Evelyn noticed and squeezed my hand. I know it hurts, she said softly. But we can't let them win. Her eyes hardened. They think we're weak, but they are wrong. It's time to fight back. Her words lit a fire in me. For too long, I'd let Matthew and his family push me aside, but not anymore. This time, we were taking control. 2 days later, Nicholas arrived. He was a slightly rumpled man in his 45s with kind eyes and a calm demeanor. As Evelyn introduced us, I studied him carefully, looking for any sign of deceit. But his warm smile and gentle southern drawl put me at ease. "Don't worry, MIA," he said. "We're going to bring those lying snakes down." We got to work right away. Nicholas was a whirlwind of phone calls and searches, digging up details of Matthew's upcoming trip to Maui. "Your husband loves his luxury resorts," Nicholas muttered, scribbling notes. "But we'll use that against him." Evelyn and I leaned in close as Nicholas circled something on his notepad with a triumphant grin. "Got it. They're staying at the Grand Wailea Resort. Fancy place, but that just means more staff to bribe." Evelyn smirked. "Excellent work. Now let's figure out how to get there quietly." Nicholas was thorough, covering every detail. Fake IDs, forged documents, everything we'd need. By the time Matthew left another pathetic message on the answering machine about extending their stay, we were ready. The morning we left, I stood outside my little house, squinting into the bright Arizona sun. Once, this house had meant everything to me: love, family, a future. Now it was nothing but a shell, a reminder of all the lies I'd lived. With a determined shove, I tossed my suitcase into the trunk and slid into the back seat beside Evelyn. She looked strong and unshaken, no longer the frail woman I had cared for. She was ready for battle. As Nicholas pulled out of the driveway, I turned back for one last look at the house. It faded into the distance, a strange sense of finality washing over me. I felt like I was shedding an old, broken life and stepping into something new, something stronger. We were no longer helpless. We were ready to fight. I watched Matthew's back as he sat at the table, dressed to impress in a linen suit that screamed wealth. Beside him, Ella draped herself in gaudy jewelry, looking every bit the spoiled aristocrat. And then there was the blonde, the same one Lily had seen by the pool. Her presence made my blood boil, but I forced myself to stay calm. This was not the time to lose focus. As Evelyn and I approached the table, I felt her tense beside me. Years of betrayal had led to this moment, and I knew she was barely holding back. Nicholas's steady hand on my elbow kept me grounded, his quiet support giving me the courage I needed. Matthew looked up first. His face twisted with confusion before shifting to panic, though he tried to mask it. "M.A.?" he stammered, his voice barely steady. "What are you doing here?" I smiled, a cold, deliberate smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Oh, I thought it was time for a little family reunion, Matthew." My voice was steady, calm, dripping with just enough venom to make him squirm. Ella's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing like a predator sensing trouble. "What's this about, MIA?" she asked, her tone sharp. Evelyn stepped forward, her voice clear and unshakable. "It's about you, Ella. And Matthew. And the little scheme you've been cooking up behind everyone's backs." Matthew's face went pale, his usual smug expression replaced by thinly veiled panic. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, don't play dumb, Matthew," I replied, crossing my arms. "We know everything. Your affair, your plans to frame me, and your pathetic attempt to steal what's mine. You really thought you'd get away with it?" The blonde looked between us, clearly uncomfortable and confused. Ella's lips thinned, her jaw tightening as she snapped, "You don't have proof of anything." Nicholas, who had been standing quietly at my side, finally stepped forward. "Actually, we do." He dropped a manila folder onto the table with a loud thud. "Photos, recordings, financial statements. It's all here." Ella's face drained of color, and Matthew looked like he might be sick. I relished the moment, watching their carefully constructed lies crumble around them. For the first time in years, I felt powerful, unshakable. "You're finished," Evelyn said, her voice calm but icy. "You won't be able to talk your way out of this one." Matthew's panic finally erupted. "You don't understand. It wasn't like that." I held up a hand, cutting him off. "Save it, Matthew. I'm done listening to your lies." The blonde stood up abruptly, grabbing her purse. I'm not part of this, she muttered, throwing Matthew a disgusted look before walking away. I almost laughed. Even his mistress didn't want anything to do with him now. Ella turned on me, her voice low and furious. You think you've won? This isn't over. Oh, it's over, Ella, I said firmly, leaning in so she could hear every word. You've spent years tearing people down, but not anymore. This time, you lose. Nicholas handed me a phone, already dialing. Time to call the authorities, he said quietly. Matthew's face contorted with anger, but there was nothing he could do. He had no power left, no control. The truth was out, and there was no running from it. As I turned to leave, I felt Evelyn's hand squeeze mine. You did it, dear, she whispered, her voice soft but proud. I looked back one last time, taking in the sight of Matthew and Ella, broken and defeated. This was justice, long overdue, but finally here. As we stepped outside into the warm Maui night, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. For the first time in years, I was free. No more lies. No more shadows. And as far as I was concerned, Matthew and his family could rot in the mess they'd created. Justice was ours, and it felt glorious. I leaned back, letting the silence stretch as the truth settled like poison in the air. Matthew sat slumped, his face pale and hollow, while Ella glared daggers at me, her lips pressed into a thin line of rage. The once smug, manipulative duo now looked small, like children caught in a lie. I turned to Lily, her tear-streaked face pale as she tried to process the reality she'd been dragged into. I'm sorry you had to find out like this, I said softly, my voice calm and measured. But you deserve to know the kind of man you're dealing with. She blinked, stunned, before standing abruptly. I don't even know who you are anymore, she whispered to Matthew, her voice shaking. I thought you cared about me. Matthew didn't respond, didn't even look at her. He just stared blankly at the table, as though the walls of his carefully built world had finally crumbled, leaving him exposed. With a soft scoff, Lily turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd of diners. The sound of her heels clicking against the marble floor was like nails sealing a coffin. Evelyn's voice broke the silence, calm but razor-sharp. I told you, Matthew, there would be consequences. Her eyes burned with a fire I'd never seen before, every ounce of her strength and fury focused on her son. I let you push me down once, but not again. You underestimated me, and MIA. Ella opened her mouth to protest, but I cut her off. Don't even try it, I said, my voice steady but cold. You think you can twist this around, pretend to be the victims again? It's over. You can't talk your way out of this. Nicholas, standing quietly behind me, placed the folder of evidence on the table. Everything's here, he said. The photos, the conversations, the financial records. You two thought you were so clever, but you left a trail of breadcrumbs anyone could follow. The authorities will have no problem connecting the dots. Ella's face turned a mottled red, her anger simmering just beneath the surface. You think you've won, she hissed, her voice low and venomous. You'll regret this, MIA. Nicholas, my words. I laughed, soft and bitter. I think I've spent enough time regretting things, Ella. But you? You'll have plenty of time to regret everything. Matthew finally looked up, his eyes hollow. You don't understand, he said weakly, his voice trembling. We did this for the family, for what Dad left behind. Evelyn's laugh cut through the room like a blade, sharp and unforgiving. Don't you dare invoke your father's name, she spat. He'd be ashamed to see what you've become. Matthew's shoulders slumped, and he fell silent again, defeated. I straightened, feeling a strange weight lift from me, as though years of anger and fear were finally leaving my body. You've spent so much time pulling the strings, thinking you could control everything and everyone around you. But you were wrong, I said, my voice steady and calm. You've lost. Evelyn rose from her seat with a grace that belied her age, her hand resting lightly on my arm. Let's go, dear, she said, her voice soft but full of triumph. I nodded, sparing one last glance at Matthew and Ella. Two broken figures slumped in their seats, the fight drained from them. For so long, they treated us like pawns, but now the game was over. As we walked out of the restaurant, the murmurs of the other diners buzzed around us, whispers of scandal and disbelief. I didn't care. Let them talk. The truth was out now, and there was no hiding from it. Outside, the warm Maui air wrapped around me like a fresh start. I turned to Evelyn, who looked stronger and more alive than I'd ever seen her. We did it, I said quietly. She smiled, a slow, satisfied smile. Yes, dear. We did. And as Nicholas joined us, his eyes crinkling with quiet pride, I finally let myself breathe. The battle was over, and we had won. For the first time in years, I felt free, no longer a pawn, no longer a victim. Matthew and Ella could try to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives, but it wouldn't matter. The truth was theirs to live with now, and I had no doubt it would haunt them forever. As for me, I was finally free to start over. Stronger, wiser, and unafraid. As I looked over the broken remains of the Owens family, a strange sense of peace washed over me. The weight I'd carried for so long, the hurt, anger, and years of resentment, seemed to vanish. In its place was a hollow sort of pity. These weren't powerful people. They were small, sad individuals who had destroyed themselves chasing money and status. By trying to control me, they had lost everything. Their wealth, their reputation, and even each other. The flight back from Maui passed in a blur. Evelyn and I sat side by side in the emergency exit row, sipping tiny bottles of bourbon and soaking in the silence. For the first time, there were no more threats lurking in the shadows, just the promise of a new beginning. Nicholas had assured us everything was under control. With his connections and the mountain of evidence we had gathered, the legal side of things would be handled. Matthew's lies, schemes, and betrayals would catch up to him in the end. As for me, I didn't care about pressing charges or dragging it out in court. I was done fighting. All I wanted was to move on. Back in Arizona, the first thing I did was put the house up for sale. It didn't take long to find a buyer. Matthew's family had chosen a house in a prime location. As I handed over the keys, I couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness. Watching the new owners beam with excitement, I whispered quietly, "Try not to make the same mistakes I did." With the house sold, Evelyn and I had to decide what came next. That evening, we sat in a booth at a local diner, maps spread across the table as we sifted through apartment listings and ideas for our fresh start. "Somewhere new," Evelyn murmured, her finger tracing the map. "A clean slate, far away from all of this." I nodded, understanding completely. The dream I'd once had, raising a family in the suburbs, building a life with Matthew, was gone, ruined by his betrayal. Maybe it was time to let it all go, to start over somewhere that held no shadows of the past. "Any ideas?" I asked. Evelyn's eyes lit up as she studied the map. "You know, I've always wanted to see New England in the fall. The leaves changing colors, the crisp air, it seems like a beautiful place to start again." A smile tugged at my lips at the picture she painted. The two of us, surrounded by trees painted in red, orange, and gold, finally at peace. "New England it is," I agreed. Over the next few weeks, we worked on leaving Arizona behind. We sold or donated the last of our belongings, searched for small towns in the Northeast, and looked at job prospects. With each step, it got easier to let go of the past. On the morning we were set to leave, I walked through the empty house one final time. Upstairs, I paused in what had once been our makeshift war room. The walls that had held maps and photos, tools of our revenge, were bare now. So much had happened here. Betrayal, anger, reckoning. But it was done. The past would stay where it belonged. A bittersweet smile tugged at my lips as I turned away. Whatever lay ahead in New England was still unknown, but this time I was ready. I vowed to face the future with clear eyes and a fearless heart. After everything Matthew and his family had thrown at us, I knew there was nothing I couldn't survive. As I walked down the stairs, I felt lighter than I had in years, free of the burdens that had weighed me down. In the hallway, Evelyn waited for me, her face calm, her smile warm and knowing. "Ready, dear?" she asked, her voice filled with quiet strength. I returned her smile and gave a firm nod. "Ready." We stepped out the door together, leaving the shadows behind us. It was time to embrace the light.